We all know stress, right? That feeling, that knot in your stomach before something big, or maybe thoughts just racing when you're trying to sleep. But what if what we think we know about stress, what if that's just, scratching the surface? Today, we're going way beyond that. We're looking at how baboons apparently get ulcers from their friends, why chronic stress can actually shrink parts of your brain, and maybe the most mind-bending part, how your idea of choice, of free will, might just be an illusion. We're diving deep into the work of Dr. Robert Sapolsky. He's this incredible neurobiologist, a primatologist too, over at Stanford. And his background is just so unique. I mean, picture this, observing baboons in the wilds of Africa, literally with a tranquilizer blowgun, but also doing cutting-edge lab work on the brain's stress response. And now he's even challenging our fundamental ideas about free will itself.
Yeah, that's right. Our mission today really is to pull out the absolute core insights from Sapolsky's decades of research. Think of this as your shortcut, your guide to understanding how stress really impacts us. We'll get into those surprising findings from his baboon studies. And then, we have to grapple with his really provocative stance on determinism, on free will.
Yeah.
Get ready for some real aha moments, I think, about what's actually driving our behavior, our health, maybe even who we fundamentally are.
Okay, so let's start with Sapolsky's journey because it's pretty wild. Apparently, he was obsessed with primates, since he was 8 years old, writing fan letters to researchers. And then fast forward, he spends 25 summers consistently, year after year, in Kenya's Masai Mara, studying baboons. You mentioned the blowgun.
Oh.
Yeah, hiding out, tranquilizing them just to get cortisol samples. People called him the Jane Goodall of baboons. Quite the dedication.
Incredible dedication. And he talks about this sort of crisis point in college, Was he going to be a primatologist out in the field or a neurobiologist in the lab? Luckily for us, he figured out how to bridge that gap. And stress became the connecting thread between the savanna and the microscope.
Right. Which leads us straight into his big book, Why Zebras Don't Get Ulcers. Such a great title.
It is. And the core idea is this really crucial difference between acute stress and chronic stress. So think about that zebra. Like you said, escaping a lion. That's acute stress. It's short, it's intense, maybe 3 minutes. And the body, fantastically adaptive for that kind of emergency. Lion's gone, threat's over, zebra goes right back to grazing. Its stress response shuts off.
Okay, makes sense. Short bursts.
Exactly. But humans, well, we chronically activate that same system, but for purely psychological reasons, worrying about mortgages, deadlines, traffic, politics. That system wasn't built for that constant, low-level hum of anxiety. Sapolsky says doing that chronically, it literally corrodes away at your health. It's using an emergency system all the time.
And this is where the baboons come back in a really fascinating way. So Sapolsky finds these baboons. They live in big social groups. They've got plenty of food, not many predators bothering them. They only spend about, 3 hours a day finding food.
Right. Which leaves them 9 hours of free time.
9 hours. And what do they do with it? They, quote, generate social stress for each other.
That's the kicker, isn't it?
Yeah. They're not getting ulcers from lions. They're getting stressed out by being, as Sapolsky puts it, psychosocially manipulative jerks to each other.
He really doesn't mince words.
No. But it makes them, as he says, perfect model systems for westernized stress. Because that's what we do, right? Social stress.
Absolutely. And what he found studying them was, pretty surprising at the time. You'd think rank, being the alpha male, would be the key to low stress, right?
Yeah. Top dog, less worries.
Well, sometimes. During unstable times, high-ranking males could actually be miserable because things were unpredictable, they lacked control.
Yeah.
But overall, Sapolsky found focusing just on rank was idiotically simplistic.
Okay. So what was the biggest factor then?
Social affiliation.
Yeah.
Connection. A baboon with a lot of grooming partners, basically friends, someone to hang out with and get the stress off their back. That baboon had a much healthier stress profile, healthier body, than just a high-ranking baboon who might be more isolated or constantly fighting.
Wow. So friendship is literally good for your health, even in baboons.
It massively underscores that it's not just the external reality, but the meaning we attach to things, the social context that profoundly impacts our biology.
Okay, so let's shift from baboon society to, inside our own heads. The impact of this chronic stress on the brain, Sapolsky really hammers this home. Stress is especially not good for your brain.
Yeah, he does. And let's zoom in on one specific area.
Yeah.
The hippocampus. Crucial for learning, for memory. It's also worryingly kind of ground zero for damage in Alzheimer's disease. And this area is incredibly sensitive to stress hormones, glucocorticoids like cortisol.
Okay, so how does cortisol affect it?
Well, here's the paradox. Short-term stress, cortisol actually helps the hippocampus. It shunts more oxygen, more glucose there, increases synaptic plasticity, makes connections easier. That's why you feel more alert, think clearer maybe during a brief emergency. And it helps form those flashbulb memories where you remember every tiny detail of a stressful event.
Right, like where you were during 9/11 or something?
Exactly. But, and this is the big but, under chronic stress, when that cortisol is high all the time, it actually damages the neurons in the hippocampus. It basically puts those neurons on an emergency energy budget. They don't get enough energy to do their normal maintenance, clean up waste products like oxygen radicals, repair DNA, get rid of misfolded proteins. Sapolsky says it's like chronic stress just constantly kicks away at the ankles of these hippocampal neurons, weakening them over time.
And we actually see this in people.
We do. Clinically, look at Cushing syndrome. It's a disease often from a tumor that causes super high cortisol levels chronically. And what do you see? Hippocampal atrophy shrinkage and significant memory problems.
Oh.
But here's a bit of good news, surprisingly. If they remove the tumor, stop the cortisol flood, the hippocampus can actually recover, grow back towards its normal size, and memory often improves. It shows some reversibility.
Okay, that's hopeful. But what about something like chronic depression? Does that cause similar issues?
It does, unfortunately. You often see similar hippocampal atrophy and memory problems in chronic severe depression. But the difference is the damage there often seems, well, more permanent or at least long-lasting, even after the depression is treated.
Why the difference? Why might it be harder to reverse in depression compared to Cushing's?
It's complex, but one key factor Sapolsky points to, which is often overlooked, is inflammation. Now, we used to think of cortisol mainly as anti-inflammatory.
Right. Steroid shots reduce inflammation.
Exactly, in the short term, peripherally. But under chronic stress, in the brain, cortisol can actually become pro-inflammatory. It contributes to oxidative stress, that same kind of damage that phrased at the edges of neurons, especially in the hippocampus, and that inflammatory damage might be harder to undo.
Okay, so chronic stress is bad for the brain, especially the hippocampus, partly through cortisol overload and partly through inflammation. So what can we do about it, this constant modern stress?
Well, this leads to the idea of needing active relaxation. Things like meditation, structured breath work, yoga, maybe even using things like saunas or cold plunges if that works for you. Sapolsky suggests these aren't just nice-to-haves anymore. In our kind of society, they're becoming essential, almost like needing food or sleep. We have to actively counteract the chronic activation.
It's kind of funny, though, hearing him talk about this, because he also admits pretty openly that he's personally terrible at stress management.
Yeah, yes, he does. He calls it a do what I say, not what I do situation.
Yeah.
Which is, I think, weirdly reassuring. It shows just how hard this is, even for the guy who wrote the book on it.
Totally. So if even the expert struggles, what does work, according to the science?
Well, the effective techniques tend to address the psychological roots of what makes something stressful. Remember those factors from the baboons and humans. A sense of loss of control, lack of predictability, having no outlets for frustration, and lacking social support. So interventions often help by increasing our perceived control, making things more predictable, finding healthy outlets, and strengthening social connections. It's about managing the psychological meaning of the stressor.
Did Sapolsky himself ever try to tackle this, like biologically? I thought I read something about gene therapy.
He did. He actually ventured into trying to make neurons inherently stress-resistant. He talks about working on an artificial gene. You could theoretically stick into a rat's hippocampus to make it less anxious during stress.
Whoa, did it work?
Well, not really. He says the field kind of hit a wall. The huge challenge was delivery. How do you get that gene into just the right brain cells safely and effectively? They couldn't crack it. He says the field basically retired him from that line of research around 2010 because the hurdles were just too big at the time.
Huh. Okay, so direct gene editing for stress isn't quite there yet. But what about the genes we already have? Do they play a role in how we handle stress?
Absolutely. And this is where the science offers maybe a more nuanced kind of hope than gene therapy. It's the understanding that genes are much more about vulnerability or predisposition, not strict determinism. We know there are variations in genes related to, say, dopamine, like COMT, brain growth factors, BDNF, the serotonin transporter system, oxytocin receptors. These variations help explain why some people are naturally more resilient to stress and others are more susceptible.
And you mentioned epigenetic changes, like in children of trauma survivors.
Exactly. We see evidence that severe stress in parents, like Holocaust survivors or mothers pregnant during 9/11, can lead to epigenetic changes, basically, changes in how genes are switched on or off in their children, affecting their stress response systems.
That sounds potentially grim, like you inherit the stress.
It sounds that way, but here's the crucial part Sapolsky emphasizes. These are not genes that doom you. Think of them more like fault lines. They make you more vulnerable if certain environmental triggers occur. Like there's a specific variant of the serotonin transporter gene. Does it guarantee depression? No. But if someone with that variant also experiences significant childhood adversity, their risk of depression might go up, he says, maybe even 30-fold without the adversity. The gene has much less impact. It's gene plus environment.
Okay, that makes a huge difference. It's not destiny, it's predisposition interacting with life. So can we influence that interaction? Can lifestyle affect how these vulnerability genes express themselves?
Yes. That's the really positive message here. Most of our DNA isn't the genes themselves, it's the regulatory parts, the on and off switches. And what influences those switches? All sorts of things. Our psychological state, our environment, our lifestyle. So things like mindfulness practice, regular exercise, getting enough omega-3 fats, maybe even certain nutrients like curcumin from turmeric, compounds in green tea, vitamin D, flavonoids, magnesium. These can potentially modulate gene expression in beneficial ways.
So it's not just about managing symptoms, we might actually be changing things at a deeper genetic level.
Exactly. Genes are not the be-all, end-all. He points out that even psychotherapy can lead to measurable changes in gene regulation. Even something like taking a vacation can help your telomeres, the protective caps on your chromosomes, recover. It shows the whole system is accessible. We can intervene, as he says, on the psychological level, on the psychosocial level, on the pharmacological level, and on the nuts and bolts level. It's dynamic.
Okay, this leads us, I think, inevitably to Sapolsky's most recent, and let's face it, most controversial work. His book, Determined, A Science of Life Without Free Will. The very idea, what if we don't actually have free will? It's unsettling, to say the least.
Deeply unsettling for many. And Sapolsky comes at this squarely as a biologist and neuroscientist, not as a philosopher arguing abstract concepts, but looking at the biological machinery. His argument, boiled down, is that everything we do, every choice, every behavior, from picking ice cream to changing careers, is the end result of this incredibly long arc of biology. Think about it. What neurons fired a second before? What hormones were floating around hours before? What genes predisposed you? How was your brain shaped in the womb? What happened in your childhood? All interacting with your environmental luck, your culture, your surroundings. He looks at that whole chain from neurochemistry back to evolution and says essentially, there's not a crack anywhere in there that you could shoehorn free will into. Where would it even fit?
Wow, no crack anywhere.
That's his stance. And he absolutely acknowledges how potentially immensely demoralizing that idea can feel.
So if it's so demoralizing and seems to take away agency, what's the upside? Why argue this? Does he see a benefit to dismantling the idea of free will?
He does, and this is maybe the most counterintuitive but powerful part of his argument. He makes the case that historically, every single time we, as a society, have subtracted free will from our understanding of why people do things, the world's become a more humane place.
How so? Can you give some examples?
Sure, think about it. We used to believe people, often women, were witches who freely chose to consort with the devil and control the weather. What happened when we understood meteorology and mental illness better? We stopped burning them. That was subtracting free will. They couldn't control the weather. Or epilepsy. Once seen as demonic possession, a choice to be evil. Now we understand it's neurological firing. Result: compassion, treatment, not exorcism.
Okay, I see the pattern.
Same with schizophrenia. It wasn't caused by cold, rejecting, schizophrenic mothering, a mother's choice. It's a neurogenetic disorder. Result: less blame on families, more focus on care. Or dyslexia, not kids choosing to be lazy, but a difference in brain wiring. Result: educational support, not punishment. In every case, he argues, removing the illusion of free will for that specific behavior led to less blame, more understanding, and ultimately more humane and effective responses.
Okay, but what about cases that feel like pure choice? Like someone decides to lose 100 pounds through diet and exercise. We see that as willpower, right? A conscious decision they made. How does Sapolsky explain that if there's no free will?
Right, that's the common challenge. His answer is stark. That person lucked out.
Lucked out.
Yeah, they lucked out biologically. They happened to have the neurobiological capacity to self-regulate appetite effectively. They happen to have the sort of brain that could generalize lessons, learn from past attempts, and apply those lessons to change their lifestyle consistently. It wasn't some magical free will spark. It was the necessary biological machinery and learning capacity being present. He says it's about learning where the buttons are and where the levers are within your own biological system.
So change is possible, but you don't choose to change. You just happen to have the capacity to learn how under the right circumstances.
Exactly. He stresses that determinism doesn't mean nothing can change. That's a total misconception. Change happens all the time. But you don't freely will the change into existence from nothing. Instead, you sort of learn, this is the circumstance that makes me more likely to change. It's a bit like the Buddhist concept of the conditioned mind, isn't it? Our responses are conditioned by everything that came before. Sapolsky takes it a step further, saying even the ability to recognize conditioning and try to decondition yourself through introspection or therapy, that ability itself is a product of your biological and environmental random luck. Your brain just turned out to have that capacity for self-reflection and learning.
Okay, if we accept this premise, even just hypothetically, the implications for society are just massive. What does it mean for, say, criminal justice?
Huge implications. Sapolsky argues that if there's no free will, then blame and punishment purely for retribution's sake become intellectually and morally unacceptable. You can't blame someone for having the brain they have, shaped by factors beyond their control. Instead, he proposes a public health model. If someone is dangerous, you absolutely constrain them to protect others, just like you'd quarantine someone with a highly infectious disease. But the focus shifts entirely to understanding the root causes of the behavior, the biology, the environment, the experiences that led to it, and figuring out how to prevent it from happening again or in others. Minimal constraint necessary for safety, maximum focus on understanding and prevention, not blame, not punishment for its own sake.
Wow, and what about things like success, meritocracy, the idea that people earn their achievements?
That gets completely upended too. If it's all biology and luck, then nobody has ever earned anything in the sense of deserving it more than someone else based on free choice. Nobody has a right to anything inherently. A successful CEO isn't fundamentally better or more deserving than someone who developed antisocial personality disorder due to their different biology and environment. They just had different luck in the biological and environmental lottery.
That's a profoundly different way to look at success and failure.
It is. And Sapolsky connects this, interestingly, back to concepts like the Buddhist idea of unselfing or anatta, no self. If you truly internalize that your successes and failures are products of forces you didn't choose, it leads to a radical shift. It implies that you are not entitled to have your needs considered more than any other human out there. It dismantles ego. Gratitude changes too. It's not, I'm so grateful that you chose to help me, but rather, I'm so grateful that you turned out to be the sort of person through all your biology and history who was able to help me.
Gratitude for the person's being, not their supposed choice.
Exactly. It fosters, he argues, a deep compassion, recognizing the immense chain of causality behind everyone's actions, good or bad.
What an incredible arc we've covered. Seriously. From baboons stressing each other out in Africa to the nitty-gritty of cortisol damaging brain cells, right through to dismantling the very concept of free will. Dr. Sapolsky's work really does give you this unique shortcut, doesn't it, to understanding these hidden forces that shape pretty much everything about our health and our behavior.
It really does. And his writing is fantastic. We absolutely encourage you, if any of this sparked your interest, to check out his books. Why Zebras Don't Get Ulcers is the classic on stress. Primate's Memoir is a great look at his fieldwork. The Trouble with Testosterone explores behavior. And of course, the latest is Determined, A Science of Life Without Free Will. They're brilliant reads, often surprisingly funny too.
Definitely worth exploring. So maybe here's something to leave you with, something to chew on as you go about your day. If our actions really are determined, shaped by this incredibly complex dance between our biology and our environment, our luck, how does that shift how you think about empathy, how you think about responsibility? And maybe, just maybe, how does it change our view on the potential for building a more understanding, a more humane future, not just for ourselves, but for everyone?